Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 226 of the Thoughttium Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. My name is Ashley Clark, and I'm a director here at Thoughttium. We continue to come live to you every Thursday at 3 p.m. Central, and you can find today's episode and all future episodes at thoughttium.com/live. Today's topic is around grit, growth, and the power of mentors. These are probably words that we've all heard often over the last number of years, but as we look at the changing landscape of 2025 and beyond, we're going to explore how all of these different concepts can continue to help us shape our careers regardless of where we're at in our journey. Because the reality is, there's always the opportunity for us to learn, grow, and change. I'm really looking forward to the conversation with our guest today. His name is Chris Finley, and he's the Senior Vice President at Foods 52. And this is his first time on Navigating Now as a guest. Welcome, Chris, to the show. How are you today?
Doing great. Yourself?
I am well, and I'm so excited to have you here with us.
Thank you.
As we jump into the conversation, I'd like to start with a quick throwback for you. I know you've had a really dynamic career, starting in finance, moving into management consulting, and then finding your way into operations, sourcing, and now in supply chain for the last number of years. And so I'm curious, as you think back to perhaps your childhood or adolescent years, what is something that sticks out to you that you would say, this is why I'm in the role that I'm in today?
Wow. Yeah, that is flashing me back quite a ways. I would say that one of the things I've always been somewhat of a numbers person, and I've always really enjoyed, kind of solving things with numbers. And I'm a sports fan too. So, one of the things that way back in my day, I used to receive the morning newspaper, and I loved to get the sports page and look at, the scores, and not just the scores, but the statistic. Basically, everybody was calculating their batting averages and different types of things. And so, as I think about measuring and a lot of the components of a lot of the work I've done, whether it's been finance or whether it's been in operations and supply chain, a lot of the underpinning decisions I'm asked to make or how to evaluate and look things come back to the numbers. So I guess if I think about it from that perspective, and somewhat not surprised, I guess, that I'm in something that has an analytical piece to it, but that's also tied to performance or activity that leads to analytics.
Oh, that is awesome. So since you brought up some of those baseball statistics, I've got to ask, do you have a favorite baseball team?
Yeah, I grew up in the Midwest, and so I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, a long-suffering Chicago Cubs
Ah,
fan, but I did see us win a World Series, which was something that I think many Chicago Cub fans were never certain was going to happen.
so I can relate. I'm also a Chicago Cubs fan. So when you started talking about the Midwest, I took a deep breath. Not quite sure if you were going to go Cubs, White Sox, or Cardinals, and I'm glad you ended up as Cubs.
Sorry to all you St. Louis fans, but definitely not Cardinals.
There we go. Oh, awesome. Well, let's kind of move up a little bit further in your career. And I know today we're talking specifically about grit, growth, and then the power that mentors have had both in you and your career, and then also as you've grown in your career, how you've kind of taken some of those components and applied them. And so I'm curious, as you think back earlier on in your career, how did you experience the role of some of those mentors and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, Ashley, I'd say that, I feel fortunate early in my career to have been in some organizations that presented themselves in a way that I was able to tap into senior leaders and be mentored in ways that I didn't actually probably even at the time realize was happening in some respects, and fortuitous to be able to, learn and grow from people in ways that I wasn't kind of anticipating and expecting. So one of my first jobs out of college, back in, I guess it was the late, early 1990s, there was kind of a tough economic situation, not atypical to where we're at today. Jobs out of college were hard to find. And so I actually started in a temporary position, but it was in a high growth company. So at the time they hired temps because they just needed people in there. And I was a finance degree major, but doing kind of menial tasks. But at the time, I was trained to work hard, find things to do, keep yourself busy, and add value. And so I kept trying to do more and more at that company. As they were growing rapidly, the finance team was struggling to keep up with the workload because the business was growing so quickly. And there was a leader that came in and basically was looking for somebody to help them while they were building out their team. And I was available, and I just grasped on to the opportunity to say, hey, I'm happy to help. And what was really exciting for me is the person just gave me a lot of opportunity to just take things and run, which, again, coming out of college, I didn't know that was normal or not normal. But it was really impactful to me because I learned and subsequently learned that that's not normal. Normally, it's a very specialized, specific, it takes time to do things. But, it had helped shape me in terms of how I was able to um, accept coaching and feedback on an early age, but do so in a way that it felt natural and normal too.
So I'm curious, when you were kind of receiving that coaching and feedback earlier on in your career, I'm sure some of that coaching and feedback was a little bit challenging for you to take on, to internalize, and to not necessarily take so personally. And so I'm curious, how did you navigate through that early on in your career where you were trying out some new things, taking on probably some projects that perhaps you had no business to take on at the time, and then we're getting some feedback around it? What was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly unsettling because, again, you don't have a textbook or a manual per se that tells you how you're supposed to do your job in early in your career, and so you have to kind of have some flexibility and adaptability to roll with where things are at. I think it comes from having the, kind of determination to just try to be doing your best and working hard at it. What I liked about the mentorship I received was it wasn't the individual telling me what to do and how to do it. It was really more about giving me something to do and asking me how I was thinking about going about doing it. And that was really different than somebody saying, here, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. Okay, I can go do X, Y, Z, and then tell me what to do next. It was more about, here's what the end game is, what I need you to get to. And you need to figure out a plan on how to get there. And what I'm most interested in is more the process and your thought process on how you're going to do it, as opposed to step by step what it was going to be. And that's had a lasting impact on me from the standpoint of, great, that's how I was trained in some respects to learn and grow and develop. And I look for similar ways to kind of pay that forward to my teams.
Yeah, it sounds like that leader that you worked with was really great at being able to set the vision and direction of where to go, and then to understand how were you thinking about getting there, but not necessarily dictating each of the steps that you needed to take. So giving you that vision and direction, but then also making sure that you had quite a bit of autonomy along the way to chart your own path, knowing that there were probably 17 different ways that you could get to that end state vision.
Right, exactly. And I think that's, it's important. There's certain things that are very linear and you have to go step A, step B, step C type of activities. But more and more, and I think today in today's work environment, the kind of creativity of solving problems is really a key skill set that isn't really easily trainable per se. It is something that you have to try and experiment with, and a lot of times you aren't given the latitude to learn from that, and make some missteps that don't get you too far off track, but at the same time give you teachable moments.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious because you mentioned that the way that leader impacted you has now impacted how you mentor and lead other folks. And so I'm curious, how has that impacted you, and how does what you experienced previously show up in your leadership today?
Yeah, I'm probably more willing to give people chances and like latitude to do
Mm.
their jobs than perhaps other individuals, because that's kind of how I learned. Excuse me. And that to me is I think I don't know, it resonated with me first. For example, it's possibly not for everybody's style and strategy, but a lot of times what I want to do is, I kind of refer to it, the similarly type of speaking is, when I give somebody an assignment, I'm not looking to give you 8 points of the 10-point plan, because that doesn't give you any real room to put your own thoughts onto it, maybe come up with a different thoughts that I'm not thinking about, and the flexibility to expand around that. So I like to say I'll give you 4 to 5 points. Your job's to figure out the next 3 to 4, and then we'll smooth the final 1 to 2 together and make sure it comes together to the outcomes that we're looking for. And from that standpoint, I've found people being responsive in that there's, like you said, autonomy, there's a sense of creativity, there's a sense of um, value for that individual to bring their perspective in. And then there's a feedback loop that allows it to stay on course so that I know what I'm expecting from a deliverable. I don't know 100%, but I have a pretty good idea what I'm looking for. I can keep shaping it, but I'm still not doing the work for those individuals. I'm coaching them through the work.
Yeah. I'm curious, what's your journey been in navigating through determining which are the projects or even some of the client and customer facing conversations and relationships where you choose to give folks that autonomy to really try out some of those new skills? You give them the vision and direction. And then what are the ones that you kind of create a little bit maybe less of that autonomy around? How do you navigate through that? Because I feel like that's a really challenging space for leaders to work through. When do you give that long leeway and really give people that autonomy to learn, grow, try, potentially fail a little bit?
Yeah.
And then how do you also make sure that you protect the integrity of the organization, the brand that you're working for, and those customer and client relationships that are so important?
Yeah, I think development is really a fascinating type of scenario where you're working through that on a bunch of different dimensions, right? So, a lot of times, I'm bringing somebody on my team together. We're meeting with a customer, whether it's an internal customer, the executive team, or whether we have external partners. We like to talk in advance of kind of what roles are in particular meetings or presentations, who's picking up certain material and not, and I'm always looking for ways to, essentially have them hear less of me and more of the other person. And so a lot of times it's really the subject matter and the sensitivity of it, and where can you try and test certain types of things. Certain areas they're very clearly the expert on this particular topic. They run with that, and then you can coach them to how to make that more impactful and powerful. Then there's other scenarios where you really want to see them step into the next level of how they would run and lead these. So effectively over time, you're in less of these particular meetings with that group because they've grown into being able to handle those interactions and those conversations. So a lot of times what I'm trying to do is read the audience on the other side and understanding, kind of what they're looking for from the material and the content, right? If they really want technical details, I want that person to go into, or the technical person to go into that. If I can see their eyes glaze over when they're going too technical, then I like to use kind of techniques to kind of help boost them along by perhaps stepping in and saying, Ashley, let me recap a little bit for you. Here's what I'm hearing. You're saying, here's what I think our customers looking for. Can we take a little different look and maybe focus less on the technical and more on what the implementation might look like, or what the impact of that activity would be, and help them reset. And I think part of that is multifold, right? You create a pause for the other person that is in their moment to kind of recalibrate and step out and give them a little bit of feedback in a constructive way, in a positive way that doesn't make them feel disempowered. And then the other side of that is it also allows the opportunity to open up the conversation with the other side of the table, so to speak, and say, is this kind of what you were expecting to hear or else? And now we can process that. And that's a whole nother development learning opportunity at the same time. It's not only self thinking about what you're presenting, but hearing the other side.
Yeah, it's so neat to hear you talk about that because one of the areas that we've seen growth in our business is around simulations. And it sounds like you're creating kind of these mini simulations for your team as they're going through these different experiences. And I think we've seen such a growth in that because of all of the different pieces that you've been talking about, where you're able to have people go through an experience like that and they can try out some of those different um, those different conversations or those different tuning into what is the customer needing, or have I gone too technical, and if so, then how do I get feedback in this controlled environment so that I can kind of scale it back and ask some more questions, or do I need to go a little bit more visionary in the conversation? And so it's really neat to hear you talk about how you're creating that environment for your team, especially given how we've seen an increase in that. And I think it's because of that feeling of you're reducing risk in real time in those interactions and conversations, and you're able to build confidence within people and teams to handle some of those complex interactions in a way that feels much safer for them.
Yeah, yeah, and it's somewhat experimental learning, and at the same time, because you're
Yeah.
going into an environment where it isn't, so to speak, scripted, that you know kind of the back and forth of it. You're trying to gain information and learn from the interaction, whether again it's an internal customer's needs requirements or an external customer, expectation and negotiation, what it might be. So yeah, that I think simulation based learning and experimental based learning are fantastic ways to be able to understand that. And then it really creates also an environment for, go back to kind of my passion for sports is, kind of the review of the game film and how did it go and what would I do differently if I would have been presented in this situation. Um, that that's how I learn best. And, I guess maybe I project that onto my team, but it feels like it's a good way for people to get tangible feedback in real time that they can associate with quite well.
Yeah, yeah, I definitely agree with that, and we see that quite a bit in the simulations that we run, and being able to chart out having specific metrics that people are being rated against, and then they've got that feedback in real time to say, "All right, I built perhaps trust with my team or trust with the customer here, but I decreased our ability to deliver on what we had committed to." And so that constant tension that I think we're all feeling, and I think you're spot on that most people thrive when they're able to have that sense of real time feedback as well, whether it's in a simulated environment or whether it's in real time with an internal customer or an external customer debriefing with you afterwards to learn, grow, and iterate on what was great and what could have continued to be better.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. I want to pivot a little bit to talk some more about growth, and grit, because I know we had some really interesting. You have some really interesting perspectives, in particular around the role of AI as it relates to grit and the changing landscape that we have in work today. And so I'm curious, how do you see the role of AI as we continue to grow as leaders, specifically as it relates to grit? And then how do you see grit continuing to shift and change, as we grow as a collective together over 2025 and beyond?
Yeah, first of all, I'm a very novice AI person. I aspire to have more insights and knowledge, and I've started to deploy it more into, my work and daily life as well, and just the capabilities and the powers of how quickly it can help you with things. And what I've observed, at least in how I've been using it and how I think it applies to the workforce and the grit, is there's so many things that I guess I've been used to over my career, having to create it from kind of scratch and putting together a lot of detail, or kind of the process and different aspects of that are pretty repetitive and pretty standardized, but there wasn't like a lot of tools and a lot of quick ways to say, help me find the best way to create a project plan to launch some new software or whatever. You can do that now, and it comes back in record time with the step-by-step methodology, plan, and approach that is right there. And it's like, wow, that would have taken me 3 days to figure that out, and it got done in 30 minutes or whatever, less than that. Um, and so that has accelerated, in my opinion, to those that have started to use and deploy it in those productive ways, to let that tool, let AI solve all the things that have already been solved before and put you in a
Mm.
position to assess and evaluate that. I think the challenge and the opportunity is that in some cases, that's good work and that's impressive work, particularly as you're more junior in your career when you present that to your boss that, hey, look at here's what the plan, here's what my plan and idea is. That's great. But what's missing, and I think what's the element of experience and what you need to learn and develop through is what is missing here, or what's going to be the nuance of executing against this plan, or what are going to be some of the unforeseen challenges that AI isn't going to help you with. What's some aspects of your business that are different than, kind of a traditional base business that, has other compliance issues or regulatory pieces, or, again, nuances that AI is helping you with, but because you're in the business and a subject matter expert, those things come into play. And so I think it's going to be fascinating to see how people use the harder to teach aspects of AI into the combination of the simplicity and the acceleration of getting to a point where you're ready to do certain things as a combinational factor. And so I'm fascinated to see kind of how this goes and where that goes. But for me, again, to get to a point where you're going to deliver with confidence, whatever your objectives are, it's one thing to have a plan. It's another thing to know how to manage the nuances, the unforeseen aspects, the hidden challenges that are invariably in front of you that AI isn't going to be able to solve because it's still a variable equation.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting hearing you talk about all those different pieces. And what I'm struck by is, as you and I have chatted over the past week or so, the role that grit had played. I think at one point in time you had mentioned that it was really about how do you
Yep.
outwork, or how do you put in that hard work, that dedication, the tenacity to kind of like what you were talking about earlier, to create a plan from scratch that's going to take you a number of days to come up with the concept of how do you even create something that hasn't been created before. And now AI can really accelerate some of those foundational aspects. But then how do you take those foundational pieces and then layer in critical thinking, and layer in analytical thinking, and layer in what is the unique perspective that needs to be applied to our business or to our customers' business that isn't necessarily something that AI is going to be as educated around, or even if it is, that there's still this finesse of it's not, it doesn't have a gut yet, and it doesn't have that heart. And so how do you pull in that gut and the heart that has been so true to business and really leverage that as a unique player moving forward to differentiate yourself and also to differentiate your
Yeah,
business?
and I think Ashley, from how that's changed through kind of my time in career, like you mentioned, um, a lot of the work that was done, earlier in my career was in building kind of the ability to figure out how to do the work, was a significant kind of value to an organization, and then the added pieces was really what kind of differentiated you from the ability to just be a good solid worker or employee that was adding value to somebody that's really taking it to the next level. So I think the challenge is going to be on how individuals today get exposure to the work that is the unique aspect of the job, as opposed
Mm,
to kind of a little bit of what
yeah.
now is potentially routine and readily available. And that's where I think development becomes so critical for leaders to be able to give opportunity to people earlier in their careers to expand and to learn and to observe and to participate into areas where, no different than AI, if you don't get exposed to that, you're never going to be able to know that, and that's the value and the ability to kind of move an organization faster, in my opinion, is allowing people to pick up on and be exposed to opportunities that maybe in the past were not right. People weren't at that level. You weren't a manager, so therefore you shouldn't be in this meeting. No, I mean, we gotta be more creative in the future as we go forward to engage people at all levels to um, to extract what they bring to the table and what insights that they have and the value that they can help an organization create. And we're probably underutilizing that. And so to me, the grit piece is how do people in their careers advocate for that and push to be more involved from just the doing to the learning piece of their job and their role. And I think, that's an interesting piece that I'm, hyper aware of as I'm building teams and building high performing teams and doing so in today's world with less resources than in the past where we had more resources. It's really critical that I see the skills of the grit, the perseverance, the eagerness, and the curiosity of employees, because that's what's going to be the differentiator between the basics to the next level.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up curiosity too. For the last number of years, I've had a running theory that that's one of the key differentiators of really effective teams is their ability to stay curious and to remain curious and to, even if you've seen a problem a number of times and you've got your assumption around what is actually going to solve it, to still remain curious and ask a couple of questions, because there's always the possibility that there's something that you didn't see or that there's some new angle that should be considered, even if it's something you've seen multiple times previously.
So yeah, that's one of my favorite words and one of my favorite personality traits that I look for in teams is curiosity.
Yeah. I'm curious before we wrap up, if there are folks who are listening who are hearing what you are saying and they're like, I want to go after that, or I want to develop some of those skills or have the ability to really demonstrate that I've got some more of that tenacity and that curiosity and that eagerness. What's one piece of advice that you would give to them as they're growing in their career?
Yeah, I'll kind of associate it to like systems and technology, right? So one of the things that when I define curiosity, I define curiosity as, I don't know, say I'm entering a purchase order in a system or something like that. I may have been trained to do these keystrokes, do this, do that, follow through, boom, done. Curiosity to me is when I push this button, what actually is happening behind the scenes of
Mm,
that button pushing? So I have to go find a vendor, I have to go do this. But behind that, there's somebody had to find a vendor to be able to cut a purchase order. And somebody negotiated a price
mm,
that is popping up when I push this button and it pops up on that field. And so to me, the curiosity piece is wondering those things and then also kind of creating the mental aptitude around, boy, that doesn't seem like the most efficient way to do something, or boy, I had to do 6 keystrokes
mm.
to get that one piece of information. Couldn't that or shouldn't that be better? And to me, that is the kind of the curiosity pieces, and that to me is also ways for people that are looking to grow and develop and add more value to their role in their organizations, is to learn behind the scenes of kind of what is the normal day-to-day routine pieces or workings and underpinnings. And you unlock a whole lot of new ways to see your job and how you can help improve things or how you can make suggestions and recommendations and or areas of interest for your career development and where you want to learn and grow. And so I think the more curious you become and not just taking things for granted, but understanding in the right times and the right places, why, what if I did this? How about if I did that? That is, I think leaders see into, that's the kind of thinking I need to have on my team.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the how do you ask the question and then the next question and then the 7 other questions that could lead you down a number of different pathways. It is really, really cool to hear you talk through that, especially as it relates to the businesses that you run. I just noticed the time, and so this has been an incredible conversation. I would love to work to round us out with a little lightning round of a couple of questions so that our viewers can get to know you a little bit better. Are you up
Oh,
for
let's
that?
do it.
Let's do it. All right. So, first question is, what is something that you are either reading, watching, or listening to that you are really enjoying? And this could either be personal or
Okay,
professional.
I'm not good to be good at remembering the titles. So recently I've gotten
It's
into
okay.
podcasts on my commute into work. So I come into work fairly early. And
Okay.
so to get my brain going, I've been on that. And the book I'm listening to right now is Never Split the Difference. So it's a negotiating book. And if people are
Yeah.
familiar with it, it's written by a former FBI hostage negotiator. And it's pretty fascinating to me right now.
Oh my goodness. I love that you brought up Never Split the Difference. That is one of my all-time favorite negotiating books. I think I've read it about 5 times now, and it's fantastic. Okay, so next question is, what is one skill that you think most leaders would be more effective if they chose to embrace, but they typically don't?
Listen more, speak less. I think
Hmm.
many times leaders feel like you have to be the one leading the meeting, the more commanding voice and presence in a particular situation. I think if you listen more, if you engage others to with questions and with curiosity, so to speak, again, you can be much more effective, and then your words are more powerful when you use them.
Hmm. Yeah, that is so much easier said than done, I think, for most leaders. All right. So the last lightning round question that I'm gonna give over to you or throw over your way is, I want you to think about one quality about yourself that you really
Oh,
admire,
geez.
and then I and then I want you to finish this sentence. If the world were more like Chris, it would be more blank.
Um, One quality I admire. You know, I like to think that because I've been doing what I've been doing for a while, I've gained a fair amount of experience. And sometimes, what feels like something normal and natural to me or something that everybody but should be seeing is not actually as apparent to everybody else. And
Mm,
so I think one of the things I'm proud of is, I see things that other people don't see. And that to me is,
mm,
a helpful way to help lead and be, kind of attuned to that and be more prepared, anticipatory, proactive than reactive. And so I like that.
mm.
Um, and the world would be better if,
Yeah.
hmm,
Or it would be, yeah, the world would, if the world were more like Chris, it would be more.
um, more like Chris. I would say it would be um, more easygoing and more
Mm.
calm and peaceful in a good way.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Chris, this has been an absolutely incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing with us about your experiences growing up and how that's led you kind of to where you're at today, the role that mentors have played in your own career, and then how you've really applied some of that to your leadership style today. And then also how you continue to develop your teams and see grit continuing to shift and change. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and we're so excited to officially have you a part of the Navigating Now community. And we wish you so much luck in your leadership and all that you
Thank you so
continue to
much,
do.
Ashley. Greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Chris. All right. So we would like to thank Chris Finley for joining us for this episode number 226 of the Navigating Now virtual roundtable series. Again, we go live every Thursday afternoon at 3 p.m. Central. We want to thank our community who continues to join us week over week on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and also direct off the Thoughtsiem website, which is thoughtsiem.com/live. We wish you all a wonderful rest of your afternoon, and we'll see you